Hey, welcome to A Foreigner in the Philippines. Well, I did a video a couple of days ago, and sorry, you'll have to excuse the dogs. They're right behind the door. 3 Pomeranians, or is it 4? I've lost count. Well, anyway, I did a video, and it got cut short, not cut short, but that was the point at which one of our subscribers, Wayne heard, and he said, "Hey, I'm Australian," and it got right to the point that was most interesting for me was your time spent in Australia. Well, so I said that I would do a video and tell you a bit about my time in Australia. So I went there. I really went there with the idea of trying to work out how I could stay, because I really loved Australia, and this was before I went to America. America kind of was like a second choice, although it had been my first choice for many years. And the reason for that was that I'm a musician, and all of the most incredible players, not that there aren't incredible players in the UK, but I always felt that my heroes were in America, and I just loved the thought of going to America. So that was what I'd had in my mind for many years. But Australia really appealed to me, and I had been there once before. I went there once before, and I tried to work out a way in which I could stay there then, and failed. So, as I explained in the last video, was that Australia, the Australian immigration, or the government there at that time, were quite clever on immigration, and they didn't want just anybody, and I came under the category of just anybody going in there. So I thought if I went to Australia, I might be able to work out a way that I could stay. Well, I went there and I had a 6-month visa. I left in good standing and before my time, so I don't have any, the Australian government doesn't have any issues with me. But I did work while I was there, because I needed to have some money coming in if I possibly could. I didn't have a pension then. I was much younger. This was, let me see, 1980s, probably about 83 or 84, something like that. Well, when I got there, it's quite interesting. I saw an ad in the paper for offering free sales training, and this was the idea. It was Brian Burt Ford, who were out on the Pacific, I think it's called the Pacific Coast Highway. It leads down to Surfers Paradise. It's a long time ago, okay, so don't expect me to remember the number on the road. And that was the place. I went there to the place that they were offering free sales training. Now, to me, it seemed like a no-brainer that what Brian Ford were doing is they were trying to have interviews with people over a period of 7 days. I think it was 5 days, Monday to Friday. They gave you free training, and you went along there. It was very interesting. I enjoyed it. But I'd realized up front that they were really looking for people to join their company, and that was the purpose of offering the free training, because then they'd be able to view what people were like, whether they when we did that training, we did a lot of role playing, and whereas people might normally sit back and watch other people do the role playing, because I'd made up my mind that they were looking for people to join their workforce, I thought they're not going to be hiring anybody that sits back and lets other people do the demos and the training exercises. So right from the very start, Monday we started the training, and straight away I volunteered for everything. In the end, on Tuesday, by Tuesday came when he says, all right, can I have somebody up here? And as soon as my hand went up, in the end he started saying, Terence, it's okay, we'll get somebody else, all right? Well, by Wednesday they'd offered me a job. I finished the training and I went to work with Brian Burt Ford, selling cars, nothing glamorous. Now, I actually thought that Brian Burt Ford was a great company, and the way that we were trained was quite interesting, because they had a place where all of the used cars, I was selling used cars, and what they did was they had a technique. This really is high pressure too, but what they did was if somebody came in and they were really interested in buying a car, then you would qualify them. You'd make sure they had a job, had money coming in, were stable, and were able to pay for the car. So, and the other thing was that they didn't want you to pay for cash, because the insurance company and the finance company, all of that paid for all of the cars to be where they were. So they wanted you to have something on finance. It's funny because the emphasis always seems that it's very difficult to get something on finance, because they are trying to qualify you and make sure that you can do it, and all of that. And a lot of the time it seems like all they're trying to do is actually turn you down, and it's not true. But what we would do is we would take them to all of the other, not just the one that they came to. So if any prospective buyer came, they'd actually look out. There was this prefab house come office that was right inside the car lot, and what they would do is they would look out and they'd see people walking around unescorted in all of the cars that were laid out. And so, for that, their expression, I always found that the Aussies had great expressions, and the Aussies they would say, there's a duck on the pond. And when I looked out, if you viewed all of the tops of the cars as being the pond, then the head of the person that you could see really did look like that. So anyway, then you would get them into another car, leave their car there, get them into another car, drive them all around the other, and there were five different places where they could buy a car. Plus, you would take them to their, it's not a factory, but they had a huge warehouse where they detailed all of the cars. Now here's something interesting. They didn't have any men detailing the cars. It was a woman who was in charge of the workforce that detailed the cars, and they did this incredible job. And I spoke to her, I said, why don't you have any men? She said, women do it better. Women are better at detailing a car because they are more detail oriented and they can do the repetition. So, which I thought was interesting, and they really did do an incredible job. So I actually stayed with Brian Burt Ford for quite a time. I got a car, not a fabulous car, but I got a usable car that I could use and drive in. So I was able to get to and from the workforce. But the highlight, that wasn't the best part. That's something that I did to survive. But the best part of being in Australia for me was, I was in Brisbane, by the way, and at first I stayed with some friends. I stayed with my friend Barry, and Barry, who, depending on your history or knowledge of history in Australia for music, you might know that there was a group in Australia that became that were on the cusp of making it, and I'm not sure how much further they went. But I'd met all of the guys in the band, in that band called Xanadu. The band was called Xanadu, and the band had been working at the Empire Leicester Square in London, and that's where the band that I was in the big band, which worked at the Empire Leicester Square for certain parts of the week when we were not on the road. And so we used to work there, and I got to know all of the guys who were all Aussies. And then they went back to Australia, and I kept in touch. And when I went to Brisbane, I actually stayed with Barry and his wife until I was able to get an apartment. And the apartment that I got was a tiny apartment in a block, and it suited all of my sense of whimsy. It was called Kangaroo Point. So Kangaroo Point was on the river, and it was right on the bend in the river, and for me it was terrific, because I used to have Sundays off, and at the weekend they always had these imitation paddle boats, the old paddle boats that used to be on the Mississippi, and they had these things, and they would go up and down the river. And during that time they offered, I never went on one myself, but they'd have a jazz band, usually trad jazz, and that would be playing on the boat, and people would dance and drink, and they'd have a certain stretch of the river that they went. But they passed my, let me see, what was I on? The second floor, and I was on the second floor, and my little balcony looked down onto the river. First was a little swimming pool, and then the river itself, and it was wonderful to me, and I really enjoyed my stay there. I actually came home with more money than I went, so even allowing for my airfare out there, I did fine. Brian Burke Ford really tried to help me to stay, and the manager of the lot that I worked on actually went to immigration with me and said we would really like Terence to stay, and it was all dressed up, and they really did want me to stay, and I would have loved to have stayed. But what the Aussie government does is they make it impossible for anybody to go to Australia and then to apply to stay. Now, when you go to America, if you go on a legal permit, even if it's only a temporary one, and you have the necessary requirements to stay, I believe it's even worse now, because they've got this open border thing, and people are pouring through the border down south, and that's a big bone of contention for a lot of Americans, because people who are trying to do it legally, which of course I had to do when I got there, I had children from my first marriage who had all gone back with the mother to America, and so I was petitioned in by my eldest son, and if it's a member of the family at that time, you literally couldn't be refused. It took 6 months. During that time, I just paid the lawyer, and I paid the lawyer. And when I went for my interview, the guy was really nice. But at one point, this was the funny thing, sometimes you think, well, this is so simple that I could have done this myself instead of paying an attorney. Well, I paid an attorney, and it cost a lot to me then. I went, and my son came with me to the interview, and the attorney as well came in with us. So that was part of the deal. And of course we talked about whether having an attorney was really necessary before, and it was going to cost a lot of money that I would have to make and pay. So at one point the guy that was interviewing us said, and I'm inventing the number of the form, but he said, do you have an AB 125? Where's the AB 125? And the attorney said to him, we have never had to supply an AB 125 in all my time as an attorney. So the guy that was interviewing said, okay. And we continued on a few more minutes, and then the interviewer stretched his hand out and said, well, welcome to America. And that was it. They don't do that in Australia, right? So in Australia, if you go as I did and go on a 6-month visa and then try to stay, it's not going to work. Even though you would go to the government, which is what we did. We went to immigration. The manager of Brian Burt Ford came. Brian Burt Ford was one of the biggest companies in Brisbane, so they had some clout. And when we went there and we spoke, we had an interview with somebody from immigration, and the manager spoke to him on my behalf and said, we really would like Mr. Martin to stay because he's been a great asset to us, and we think it would be good just all round. And the interviewer said, well, yes, he probably can stay and just put all of this information in his application, which he must make from his home country. So whatever happened, no matter what the talk was, I still had to go back to the UK and apply and get Brian Burt Ford to sponsor me and all of that, and that never happened. Okay, so a little while after that, I actually went out to America just on a short visit and decided that I would love to stay, and that was it. I came back and then arranged to go. It wasn't a happy time splitting up with my my then wife, which I begged with her to go with me. She wouldn't do that, and so it ended there. But my time in Australia, which is really what I was going to talk about, as I said, it was really great to be on the river, and see all of this beautiful climate. Always seemed to have beautiful weather there. Well, it was hot for me as a Brit, as a visiting Brit. It was hot, but I've always been able to put up with heat better than cold, so it was okay for me. Now I used to play. I took my trombone out there with me, and through my friend Wayne, who was one of the guys in Xanadu, he knew of another band called the Cadillacs, and so I played with the Cadillacs, and they had little gigs here and there. They're just a group of guys getting together and playing a top 40 band. Anything that was in the hit parade in the top 40 was what we played, and that's what I've been doing in the UK, and so I just fell right into that. And I also played trombone as well, which for them was an added little added attraction. And of course I was really playing then, had never really stopped. So I had a really great time there, and I would have loved to have stayed, but it really wasn't to be. So there were many things that I liked about Australia. Of course, I loved the climate. In my previous visit, I'd stayed, let me see, I'd stayed in, I think it was Brisbane, and because that's even further back than 83. I'd stayed with some friends of friends, and while I was there I actually went and I took a road trip down to Sydney, and I stayed in Sydney for a little while, thinking once again that I could work out a way that I'd be able to stay. It wasn't to be. And then my later trip, when I went there for 6 months, wasn't to be. I actually moved from Brian Burkford, and I went to another car sales place, which really wasn't very nice. I'd been used to the way that Brian Burkford had done things, which was very professionally done, and the thing of helping people to go around and see how the cars are detailed, and when I went with Brian Ford and I took them to the place where the cars were looked over before they were sold again, I could go to another car and pick the service sheet off the windshield and say, look at what is done to a car. Now that was done in ignorance, because what I didn't realize at the time, and nobody was going to tell me because I was doing pretty good on sales, no one was going to tell me that that was the service sheet for a car that might be owned by a private customer who had brought it in for a service and for work to be done. So anyway, I used that as a sales pitch out of ignorance, and it did work. It did work for me. So all in all, it was a great trip for me, and I'll always remember Brisbane as being a very beautiful place. Plus, where I worked was on, I think it was called Pacific Coast Highway, and that led down to Surfers Paradise, and Surfers Paradise was good for its name. It was only, I think, not even a couple of hours drive down to the coast, incredible beaches, and it was really enjoyable. And I remember that we went with all the guys in Xanadu, because as soon as I got there, I was staying with Barry, who was kind of like the leader of Xanadu, and I was staying with him, and got together with the whole family, because I knew everybody in that band. So that was going to a safe place with people I knew, not on my own. But I've done that before in various places, and I can survive. But it made it a pleasure to have a group of friends that I knew and that cared about whether I was okay. So that was my little experience in Australia, which actually I really did enjoy. So Wayne, I hope that satisfies your curiosity about how I got on in my little apartment in Kangaroo Point, which, as I say, fitted all of my little fantasies about being in Australia. What better than to be in Australia as a visitor and stay in an apartment in Kangaroo Point? So it was pretty good. So anyway, and coincidentally, my friend, my closer friend in Xanadu was Wayne Anderson, and he is still there. All of the guys are still there in Brisbane. Barry, I remember that Barry worked in a mall, and he was the manager of either an electronics store or a music store who dealt with a lot of electronic stuff. So Barry, and the other guys. It was a great pleasure for me. So, thanks for being with me, and bye for now.